I knew something was wrong the second I turned onto my driveway because from half a mile away, I could already see bright red tape flapping in the wind across my roof, like somebody had sealed off a murder scene. And for a second, I honestly thought maybe the installers had gotten hurt or a tree had come down while I was at work. But then I pulled closer and saw the stickers. Stop work. Order. Every few feet across all 24 of my brand new solar panels. The same panels I'd spent 3 months planning, financing, arguing with contractors over, and waiting on permits for. 18 grand sitting up there under the Texas sun, wrapped in violation notices like contraband. I just sat in my truck staring at it, engine still running, feeling that weird kind of anger where your face gets hot before your brain even catches up. Then I noticed the envelope taped to my front door. Unauthorized exterior modification. Immediate removal required. Daily fines begin Monday. Signed by the Oak Ridge Canyon Residential Association, which was interesting considering I didn't even live in Oak Ridge Canyon. My house sat on 3 acres of old ranch land outside the subdivision fence line. My grandfather bought this property back when the whole area was still cattle pasture and mesquite brush. The subdivision came later. Huge stucco houses, fake Tuscan fountains, HOA board members driving golf carts around like mall cops with retirement accounts. I remember standing there on my porch reading that letter 3 times because it honestly felt too stupid to be real. I'd pulled county permits, hired licensed electricians, passed inspection, everything completely legal. But apparently my roof was offending somebody's sense of luxury aesthetics. I called the number on the notice, and after 2 transfers, I got connected to the HOA president, this guy named Bradley Mercer. Now, I'm going to be honest with you. There are some people you dislike within 5 seconds of hearing their voice, and Bradley had one of those voices. Real polished country club energy. Like he'd spent his whole life explaining rules to people he thought were beneath him. Before I could even finish introducing myself, he goes, "Yes, Mr. Grayson, we've already reviewed the situation regarding your solar installation." Reviewed, like they were the zoning board for the entire county. I said, "You mean the solar panels on my property?" And he lets out this little sigh like I'm exhausting him already. The panels are highly visible from the western entrance to Oak Ridge Canyon, and several residents have expressed concerns that they negatively impact community presentation. Community presentation. I swear these people talk like they were preserving the Vatican instead of protecting a neighborhood full of beige houses and leased BMWs. I said, "Bradley, your HOA doesn't govern my land." There was this pause. Then he goes, real smug, "Actually, county ordinance revisions passed earlier this year allow architectural review authority for structures impacting shared scenic corridors." Shared scenic corridors. That's when I literally laughed out loud, standing there on my porch because it sounded completely made up. He didn't laugh though. "Failure to comply," he continued, "will result in escalating financial penalties and possible legal action." Then he hung up on me, didn't even let me respond. And I wish I could tell you I immediately turned into some mastermind revenge genius after that. But honestly, the first thing I felt was tired, just deeply tired, because I'd spent most of my adult life avoiding people exactly like Bradley Mercer, people who mistake authority for importance. My wife Rachel used to say neighborhoods like Oak Ridge Canyon were built by folks who wanted country living without having to see actual country people. She'd laugh when she said it. But she wasn't wrong. Rachel passed 3 years ago from ovarian cancer, and after she was gone, throwing myself into projects around the property became the only thing that kept me sane. The solar setup wasn't just about lowering electric bills. It was the first thing I'd felt excited about in years. Rachel had wanted us to go solar forever. Said she loved the idea of this old ranch house making its own power out under the open sky. So standing there looking at those stupid red violation stickers, it felt personal in a way Bradley Mercer could never understand. That night, I sat at my kitchen table with a beer and started reading county ordinances line by line. And somewhere around midnight, I realized something interesting. Bradley had twisted the truth just enough to sound convincing. The county had updated renewable energy language recently, but the actual law didn't give HOAs more power over solar installations. It restricted them from blocking them in the first place, which meant Bradley either hadn't read the law or he thought I wouldn't. And that should have been the end of it. Call a lawyer, send a letter, threaten a lawsuit. Simple. Except around 1 in the morning, while scrolling through county development records, I stumbled across something else tied to Oak Ridge Canyon. Something that changed the entire direction of the story. See, about 5 years earlier, Oak Ridge Canyon had gone up ridiculously fast. I'm talking entire streets appearing almost overnight. Foundations poured before the last phase even passed inspection. Contractors rotating in and out so quickly nobody could keep track of who was doing what. Around here, people joked that developer, Sterling Ridge Communities, built houses the same way casinos pump oxygen into gambling floors. Move fast enough and nobody notices the bad decisions until they're already trapped inside. At the time, I didn't pay much attention because Rachel was sick and my world had gotten very small. But once I started digging through permit records that night, patterns started jumping out at me. Inspection delays, contractor substitutions, electrical amendments filed after occupancy approvals. One address even had 3 separate correction notices tied to grounding violations that somehow disappeared from the final report. The deeper I looked, the stranger it got. Around 2 in the morning, I leaned back in my chair thinking, there is no way all this passed cleanly, and that's when I thought about Nate. Nate Alvarez and I went to high school together. He'd been an electrician for 20 years before moving into county inspections. One of those guys who could glance at a breaker panel for 3 seconds and tell you whether your house was secretly trying to burn itself down. We still grabbed beers every couple months, mostly complaining about taxes and lower back pain like every other pair of middle-aged men in Texas. So the next evening, I called him up and asked if he wanted to meet at Murphy's Tap Room off Route 9. He showed up in his county work shirt looking exhausted already. We ordered wings, watched half an inning of baseball in silence. Then I casually mentioned Oak Ridge Canyon. Nate immediately snorted into his beer. Those houses? He said. Man, I wouldn't buy one of those places if you gave me the keys for free. That got my attention. I asked why. He wiped sauce off his fingers and leaned closer. Because developers cut corners everywhere now, especially electrical. Homeowners don't see it because drywall hides all the sins. Then he started listing things off like he was reading grocery items. Undersized service panels, overloaded circuits, cheap aluminum connectors, bad grounding, junction boxes buried behind insulation where nobody checks them again for 20 years. Most of the time, he said, inspectors catch enough to force repairs. But when counties start rushing occupancy approvals because developers are screaming about deadlines, he shrugged. Stuff slips through. I asked him if Oak Ridge Canyon had problems specifically. He looked at me for a second, probably realizing I suddenly sounded way more interested than a normal homeowner should. Why? He asked. So I told him everything. The stop work order, Bradley Mercer, the fake ordinance threats. Nate burst out laughing so hard the bartender looked over. Hold on, he said. These idiots tried to regulate solar panels on land outside their HOA. Yep. That is the dumbest thing I've heard all month. Then his expression changed slightly. But if Bradley Mercer is involved, that actually tracks? Apparently Bradley had spent years filing complaints against neighboring ranch owners over everything from fence height to livestock smells drifting near the subdivision trails. One time he reportedly tried pressuring the county to regulate rooster noise because residents complained hearing farm animals ruined the luxury atmosphere during morning jogs. "D thinks he's governor of Western Travis County," Nate muttered. We sat there for another hour talking about inspections. And eventually, I asked the question that changed everything. Hypothetically, if somebody had concerns about electrical safety in a development, how would that get investigated? Nate smiled immediately, which honestly should have been my warning sign. Anonymous reports, he said. County has to investigate potential fire hazards within 48 hours. I took a sip of beer, and what qualifies as suspicious? He grinned wider. Flickering lights, burning smells, transformer fluctuations, anything involving possible overload risks. Then he pointed a wing at me. But if you're thinking about starting drama, don't tell me. I enjoy plausible deniability. The crazy part is I drove home still not completely sure I was going to do it, because despite how satisfying revenge sounds in theory, real revenge has weight to it. Once you start something, you don't fully control where it goes. I sat awake half the night wrestling with it. Part of me wanted to just sue the HOA and move on with life like a reasonable adult. But another part of me kept picturing those red violation stickers across Rachel's solar panels, because in my mind they were hers too. She'd picked the original design layout herself before chemo got bad. She used to sit at this exact kitchen table watching YouTube videos about off-grid living while I pretended not to care. So around 6 the next morning, before work, I opened the county reporting portal and filed a complaint. I kept everything technically truthful. I reported concerns about repeated electrical flickering inside multiple homes during evening peak loads. mentioned hearing residents discuss hot breaker panels and power inconsistencies, suggested possible grounding issues due to rushed construction phases. Nothing fabricated enough to become illegal, just enough smoke to justify someone checking for fire. Then I went to work and forgot about it for exactly one day. Tuesday morning around 10, my phone buzzed. It was my neighbor Dale, who owns the feed store down the road. First thing he says is, "You seen this circus over at Oak Ridge?" I stepped outside the warehouse and looked toward the subdivision from across the highway. County trucks everywhere, utility vans, inspectors in reflective vests walking house to house carrying thermal equipment and voltage testers. Even from a distance, you could feel tension rolling off the neighborhood. By lunchtime, the local Facebook groups were melting down. Residents complaining inspectors were opening panels inside garages and shutting off breakers. Somebody posted a blurry picture of a red tag notice taped to a front door. Then another one appeared. Then 5 more. That evening, Nate called me laughing before I even answered. "Buddy," he said, "you did not hear this from me, but your little scenic corridor kingdom is having a rough week." Turns out inspectors found major service panel violations almost immediately. Sterling Ridge Communities had installed 150-amp panels in homes designed for 200-amp demand loads, which sounds boring until you realize that means dozens of expensive suburban houses were technically overloading their electrical systems every single summer afternoon when everybody blasted AC at the same time. And once inspectors started looking closer, everything unraveled. Improper grounding rods, shared neutral wiring, sloppy junction terminations. A couple homes even had scorched insulation hidden behind unfinished attic spaces. By Thursday morning, 16 houses were officially classified as hazardous occupancy risks pending correction. And that's when Oak Ridge Canyon transformed from luxury suburb into full-blown construction apocalypse. Utility trenches got cut through pristine sidewalks. Generators hummed nonstop. Concrete crews tore up driveways to access buried conduit lines. Residents couldn't run major appliances simultaneously without temporary restrictions. The entire neighborhood sounded like an airport runway from sunrise until dark. Jackhammers, backup alarms, circular saws, men yelling over compressors. One afternoon, I drove past slowly just to see it for myself, and honestly, it looked like karma wearing a hard hat. Half the streets were lined with portable toilets and spools of heavy cable, while frustrated homeowners stood outside filming contractors with their phones like war correspondents. And right in the middle of all that chaos, I spotted Bradley Mercer standing near the clubhouse in loafers and a tucked-in polo shirt, arguing with somebody from the county while dust blew across his perfect little subdivision entrance sign. For the first time since this whole thing started, he looked small, not powerful, not polished, just overwhelmed. And apparently, things were about to get even more uncomfortable for him because Friday evening, right around sunset, Bradley Mercer pulled into my driveway personally. I was sitting on my porch when Bradley showed up. Just me, an old glass of iced tea, and the sound of distant jackhammers echoing across the hills like somebody tearing apart the world one slab at a time. He climbed out of this silver Range Rover that looked freshly washed despite the construction dust floating through the whole county. And for a second, he just stood there adjusting his sleeves like he was trying to rehearse confidence before walking up to me. But confidence only works when people still believe you have leverage. And Bradley didn't have leverage anymore. Not after half his neighborhood started threatening lawsuits against the developer. Not after residents realized the HOA board had spent months obsessing over cosmetic violations while actual fire hazards sat hidden behind their drywall. He walked onto the porch wearing this exhausted expression I hadn't seen before. Funny thing about people like Bradley, they spend so much time performing control that when life finally punches through the act, they don't know what face to wear anymore. "Mr. Grayson," he said carefully, "I was hoping we could have a conversation." I gestured toward the empty chair beside me. "Sure." He sat down stiffly while somewhere in the distance a generator kicked on with this awful metallic roar. For a few seconds, neither of us spoke. Then Bradley cleared his throat. "This inspection situation has created considerable strain within the community." I looked out toward Oak Ridge Canyon. You could actually see work lights glowing above the rooftops now because crews were running overtime trying to replace service equipment before another heat wave rolled through. "Yeah," I said quietly. "Electrical safety'll do that." He gave me this tight little smile that never reached his eyes. "I imagine you found recent developments somewhat satisfying." There it was. Not an accusation exactly, but close enough. I shrugged. I imagine the residents are probably wondering why the HOA spent more energy harassing solar panels than checking whether their houses were wired correctly. That landed harder than I expected. Bradley looked away immediately, jaw tightening, and right there, for the first time, I realized something important. This was never really about solar panels. Not completely. It was about image. Oak Ridge Canyon sold itself as perfection. Controlled landscaping, approved paint colors, luxury country living without unpredictability. My solar panels represented something Bradley couldn't curate or manage. They stood out. They reminded people the world existed outside his little manufactured bubble. And people like Bradley hate reminders that they aren't actually in charge. Eventually, he exhaled slowly and said, "The board may have acted too aggressively regarding your property." May have. I almost laughed. You threatened me with fines over illegal installation outside your jurisdiction. Mistakes were made. That's one way to phrase it. Another pause. Then finally, he got to the real reason he came. What would it take, he asked carefully, to resolve this matter amicably? You know what surprised me most in that moment? I wasn't angry anymore. A week earlier, I probably would have enjoyed humiliating him. But sitting there listening to construction noise roll across the valley, all I really felt was tired clarity. Rachel used to tell me revenge sounds exciting until you finally get it and realize it doesn't actually rewind the damage that started everything. She was smarter than me about most things. So I kept it simple. I told Bradley the HOA would remove every violation notice immediately, issue written confirmation acknowledging they held no authority over my property, reimburse the delays caused to my installers, and formally support renewable energy exemptions at the next county zoning meeting. Publicly. He winced at that last part. That may be difficult politically. I looked toward the subdivision where a trenching machine was chewing through another stretch of decorative sidewalk. Seems like your community's already dealing with difficult politics. Bradley sat there silently for a long moment, listening to the chaos his perfect neighborhood had become. Then finally he nodded once. I'll speak with the board. He stood up to leave, but before stepping off the porch he turned back toward me. For what it's worth, he said quietly, I truly did believe I was protecting the community. And honestly, that was probably true. That's the dangerous thing about people obsessed with control. Most of them genuinely believe they're helping. They convince themselves authority equals wisdom, that preserving appearances matters more than questioning whether the foundation underneath is rotting apart. After he left, I sat outside another hour watching the sunset reflect off my solar panels. Rachel would have loved that view. A week later, the HOA formally withdrew every complaint against me. 2 weeks later, Bradley Mercer stood at a county zoning meeting, looking like a man being forced to swallow broken glass while publicly acknowledging property owners had the right to install renewable energy systems without unnecessary interference. I actually almost felt bad for him. Almost. Meanwhile, Oak Ridge Canyon spent the next 3 months buried under non-stop repairs. Total cost estimates floated somewhere around $1.8 million by the time lawsuits and infrastructure corrections settled out. Sterling Ridge Communities quietly dissolved into another holding company before residents could really go after them properly. Funny how developers disappear when bills finally come due. As for me, the solar system went fully online before summer peaked. First electric bill after activation came in so low I stared at it for 5 straight minutes thinking the utility company made a mistake. Some mornings now, I'll sit on the porch drinking coffee while the inverter hums softly in the garage and sunlight rolls across the panels Rachel helped design. And every once in a while, I catch myself smiling about the absurd chain reaction that started because one HOA president couldn't tolerate the sight of a few black rectangles on a rooftop. But here's the part I still wrestle with. Maybe I could have handled it differently. Maybe I should have taken the legal route first instead of lighting a fuse under the county inspection office. Because yeah, the developers deserved exposure. And those electrical problems absolutely needed fixing before somebody got hurt. But a lot of regular families got dragged through weeks of stress and construction chaos too. People who never had anything to do with Bradley's little power trip. So I don't know. Maybe what I did was justified. Maybe it was petty. Maybe it was both. That's why I want to ask you. If somebody came after your home, your property, something deeply personal tied to someone you loved, would you have fought back the same way? Or would you have let it go before the fallout spread beyond the people who started it? Let me know in the comments. And if you enjoy stories where ordinary people push back against arrogant systems that think nobody will challenge them, hit subscribe, because trust me, This wasn't the first time a quiet man with a little patience completely ruined somebody's perfect plan.